Let's dive into 8 players I want on every single Dynasty roster heading into 2024. To start us off, I'm going right to the quarterback. I am going to Dak Prescott. And the last time I put out a video talking about contenders, I talked about Dak Prescott. Back in May, he was off the board as QB 17. Now, that price has not held. Obviously, I think everybody's started to realize what Dak Prescott actually is going to do this season. But even now, as of July, he is off the board as QB 13. He's only 30 years old. He is not near the end of his career. He doesn't even feel like he's near like a production cliff. If we just look at his last 4 seasons, Dak Prescott is in his prime, right? If you go back to 2020, he played a very, very short season, but in that time frame, he was the QB1 in points per game. And you go to 2021, he's the QB7 in points per game. Now, 2022, objectively bad year for Dak, right? QB 16, under 20 points per game, not what you want to see. He bounces back in 2023, finishes as the QB2. Now, objectively, to be fair and just tell the whole picture, it was a down year for quarterbacks in general, right? He was under 24 points per game. But the point remains, how often do you find a quarterback that is routinely going to be a top 10 quarterback in points per game that is available for less than QB1 prices? And when you look at the situation he's currently in, like this season, the Cowboys are going to have to throw a ton. We've talked about this at length. I have mentioned this in several different videos. They don't have a real solid running game at all. You have Rico Dowdle, undrafted free agent a couple years back. You have the ghost of Ezekiel Elliott, who I still think is an interesting value. But there's not much else. You have Deuce Vaughn, Malik Davis. What are you going to do? You're not going to be able to run the ball consistently here. If they want to win games, it's going to be on the back or, honestly, the arm of Dak Prescott. So basically, you could be looking at career high passing numbers for Dak Prescott. That alone is going to obviously let him finish top 10, but he really does have a path to finish as a top 5 quarterback this year, just because they're going to need him to do that if the Cowboys want to be interesting whatsoever. So Dak Prescott, you don't have to pay QB1 prices necessarily, but he just feels like the perfect target for a cheap contender. Speaking of cheap options at quarterback, though, we have another QB, and it's Kirk Cousins. He's off the board as QB 24. And you're probably thinking, Kirk Cousins, the guy that just tore his Achilles. Yes, that Kirk Cousins. You might also be thinking, if you're going to pick a guy off of an Achilles tear, why not take Aaron Rodgers, right? Why not take the future Hall of Famer? Aaron Rodgers is over 40. Kirk Cousins is 35 years old. That 5-year gap is a notable gap when you're trying to come back from a horrific injury. The last time we saw Aaron Rodgers, he was not great for fantasy. The last time we saw Kirk Cousins, just last year, he was on pace to throw for over 5,000 yards. He was the QB6 in points per game. Like, Kirk Cousins is not done. I don't think he is. And you put him in this new offense, and you no longer have Justin Jefferson. You don't have TJ Hawkinson. You don't have Jordan Addison. But you still have a great supporting cast. So with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Darnell Mooney, who I still think is fine, there is so much there for Kirk Cousins to absolutely crush his QB 24 price tag in Dynasty. Like, I get he's down here because of age, not because of actual talent. But as a contender, you're only looking for these short-term plays. That's really the goal here, because you're trying to maximize your 2 to 3 year title window. And I think we're going to get that from Kirk Cousins. Quickly, before we jump to the running backs, if you want to see the rebuilding version of this video, check it out, guys. The link is in the bio. Check out the 8 players I want on every rebuilding roster. Now, all right, back to the running backs here. Let's get into it. The first running back I want is Joe Mixon. Like, it's a trendy pick. I get that. Like, he is a hot name in Dynasty circles, specifically for contenders. He gets traded to the Houston Texans. He signs a multi-year deal. Everything points to Joe Mixon being a very, very important piece of what looks like it could be a top 7, top 8 offense in the NFL at worst. Yeah, I'm in. I'm 100% in on Joe Mixon. This is the same offense led by a rookie quarterback, just to point that out last season, that had Devin Singletary averaging over 15 points per game when he played at least 60% of the snaps. Do you think they traded for Joe Mixon and gave him an extension to not play him as a true workhorse running back? I 100% do. I think most people do. Dameon Pierce is not good. They just signed Cam Akers. RIP to what I thought was going to be a good career, but Cam Akers is not good. Joe Mixon last season, in I think what's probably going to be an equivalent offense, averaged 15.7 points per game. There's no reason he can't come out here and do that again. That was the RB11 in 2023. If you can go and get an RB1 finish out of Joe Mixon at this point in his career for that price, you almost have to do it. It feels irresponsible to not make an offer for Joe Mixon. And on the other end of the running back spectrum, it's Breece Hall. And yes, obviously you want Breece Hall as a contender, but I just want to talk about it a little bit more. He's the RB3 in ADP. He's 23 years old. And last season, when he actually got fully healthy, was actually a full-time player, so week 5 on, he averaged over 20 points per game on an offense that did not have Aaron Rodgers, that had offensive line concerns, had just a million different issues, and he was coming back from an ACL tear. It was literally, I think, one of the most impressive seasons I've seen in a very long time. He's now 2 years removed. They are adding Aaron Rodgers, hopefully staying healthy. I mean, even Aaron Rodgers isn't vintage Rodgers, which I don't think he's going to be. He's better than whatever the hell the Jets have been throwing out there the last couple of seasons. Breece Hall is one of the very few elite running backs in the NFL at this point, one of the true workhorses, and is a legitimate dark horse to finish as the overall RB1 in Dynasty, or overall RB1 just in the season for 2024. If you can tear back from Christian McCaffrey, if you can tear back from Bijan Robinson and just take Breece, I think that's fine because I think he's as talented, if not better, than both of those running backs. Sticking with the theme of expensive youth, I think Nico Collins fits the bill for contending rosters. 25 years old, coming off of a legitimate breakout season. And the negatives, get him out of the way, right? We have Stephon Diggs. They obviously added what they hope to be a massive contributor to this offense. You have Tank Dell. But here's the thing with both of them. Stephon Diggs faded hard last year. Stephon Diggs is much older than Nico Collins at this point and is probably at the tail end of his career here. Not great. Tank Dell. I love Tank Dell. I've talked about Tank Dell extensively. When we talked about rebuild trade targets back in May, Tank Dell is on that list for me. But if I am a contender, I want Nico Collins because Tank Dell's also coming off of a season-ending injury. These things matter. As much as we want to pretend they don't, I think Tank Dell will be great at long term. This season, Nico Collins is my bet. As wide receiver 15 off the board, that could look like a huge discount coming into the 2025 season because what Nico Collins did, production aside, just the peripherals behind the scenes, what Matt Harmon found in his reception perception profile is Nico Collins turned into one of the best route runners in the NFL on the outside. Hands down. Versus man coverage, 94th percentile win rate. Elite. Absolutely elite. Versus press coverage, 96th percentile win rate. Outside, there are very few wide receivers that have the package and the skill set that Nico Collins does. I am going to continually bet on Nico Collins to have massive week-winning performances this year. Now, getting back to our cheaper plays for our contenders here, let's go to Mike Evans. Wide receiver 32 off the board, 30 years old, and who does it better for longer than Mike Evans? When I'm looking for these win now targets at wide receiver that don't cost an arm and a leg, I'm looking for two things. One, I am looking for spike week potential, right? Can you go out and win me a week at any given point? Mike Evans does that. Again, 6 top 10 weeks last season alone with Baker Mayfield. Mike Evans is the king, it feels like, of spike weeks. He could easily win you a playoff, a championship on his own. He's that kind of guy. The other piece I want is at least some level of consistency. And we just talked about it, right? 6 straight seasons of 15 points per game. Mike Evans is everything you want in a wide receiver, and he does not cost what he used to because he's hit that 30-year-old mark. There is a reason he is cheap. You are still betting he sticks around. I'm making that bet for one more season. And to close us out, we have 2 tight ends here. The first being George Kittle. Off the board as tight end 9. He is 30 years old. And here's the thing. George Kittle is one of the more fun players to watch, just hands down. If you got points for just blocking, enjoying yourself, George Kittle might be tight end 1 every single season. Fortunately, that's not the case. Last year, he's tight end 6 in points per game. He had 41% of his games over 15 points. That's what I care about at tight end, right? Can you give me high level production? 15 may not sound like a lot, but that's basically tight end 1 or top 1 territory for tight ends on a week to week basis. So great. That is exactly what I want. And if you're looking at it as a whole, right, outside of the vacuum of last season, this team is semi-injury prone. They tend to get hurt a little bit more than others, it seems. And George Kittle is usually a huge beneficiary. The contingent upside for George Kittle is what makes him such an interesting win now piece, because if anybody goes down, if Ayuk goes down, if Debo goes down, if CMC goes down, Kittle has the skill set to absorb more. Like, he has the skill set to become the focal point of an offense at any given time. There are very few tight ends out there that are capable of that and are this cheap. That's the other piece. Like, tight end 9 prices, that's free. I mean, back end, tight end 1, no brainer. Kittle is one of those. If you don't have the elite guys, if you don't have Kelsey and Andrews and Kincaid and Bowers, Laporta, McBride, I'm going to keep going, right? All of those players, if you don't have them, Kittle's the one I want because he has game-breaking ability, and that's what you need to win a title in fantasy. And finally, our last player, it is another Dallas Cowboy, and it's Jake Ferguson. Now, he's off the board, tight end 12, 25 years old. He's a subpar athlete. Not great, right? Last season, 10.9 points per game. Nothing special. But if you take what I said about Dak Prescott, this team is going to have to throw, and then you just apply that to Jake Ferguson, it's probably going to be something good. That's just the truth. We've seen tight ends in this offense when they don't have a true number 2, which, look, Brandon Cooks is, I think, an interesting deep play, but he's not a true number 2. You have a void here for a player that is going to have to catch passes behind CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson could be that guy, just like Dalton Schultz was a couple years back. Dalton Schultz finished, right, as the tight end 3 on the season. Now, I think the tight end landscape is dramatically different than it was a couple years ago, but you could see Jake Ferguson put up 12 to 14 points per game this year. If he does that, buying him as tight end 12, not only is his price going to increase the following season, but it's a discount relative to everybody else going ahead of him. Jake Ferguson may not be the exciting play, but if you don't have the elite names, you need to find a guy that is going to see a ton of volume, and that is exactly what Jake Ferguson's going to do this year.